Ashley Judd is in Boston, England, tracking down her ancestor William Brewster's path before he set sail on the Mayflower to the New World.
Now that I've seen William Brewster's name outside the jail cell in which he was held for sharing his beliefs, I have so many questions. Thankfully, I'm meeting with a Pilgrim expert, author Nick Bunker. I've obviously seen the prison cells downstairs.
But you probably don't know what the circumstances were in which he ended up in those cells.
Right.
And that's why we have with us another document which I think can help you further down the path of understanding.
History of the Plymouth Plantation, written by William Bradford.
Absolutely. You just saw his name on the plaque downstairs. Absolutely right. And what you're looking at now is a description of the events that led up to the incarceration of William Brewster in the cells that you saw downstairs.
Being thus constrained to leave their native soil and country, ports
and
havens were
shut against them.
Oh. Okay, so in 1607, they were already seriously contemplating leaving England, and they wanted to go.
Absolutely, because that was when the Archbishop of York made it very clear indeed that he intended to crack down on separatism very hard in their area. So really they had no option but to find some escape route, and this was the best place that they could find to come.
So ports and havens were shut against them.
Technically, you needed to have a license from the government in London if you were going to leave the country. And of course, they wouldn't have been able to apply for a license because, of course, they were already effectively fugitives.
There was a large company of them that hired a ship, wholly to themselves, and made agreement with the master to be ready at a certain day. But when he had them and their goods aboard, he betrayed them. Wow. They were presented to the magistrates. After a month's imprisonment, the greatest part were dismissed and sent to the places from whence they came. But 7 of the principal were still kept in prison, and so William Brewster was one of the 7 principals.
Oh, definitely, yes.
So for about how long was he in prison in this building?
Well, several months. Generally speaking, though, conditions in Jacobean prisons at this period were pretty awful. And of course, many prisoners died in prison. Jail fever was a common complaint, but it doesn't appear that he was ever actually put on trial. He was clearly released. For whatever reason, we're not entirely sure.
Huh. Do you have any idea where he went from here?
He went into hiding, that's clear. Somehow or other, though, he got over to Holland during the course of 1608. In Holland, they could enjoy a degree of religious freedom because the Dutch did not have an official state church. There were already a number of English Puritan and separatist exiles in the same city in Amsterdam, several hundred. So they had paved the way, if you like, for the pilgrims.
So if he spent 12 years in Holland, between 1608 and 1620 is a long period of time before he sails on the Mayflower. Where should I go next?
Well, you don't actually have to go to Holland. What you can do is simply head southwards towards Cambridge, specifically Trinity College, Cambridge, where I think you'll find they have some material that will take you a little bit further.
It seems as though William Brewster narrowly escaped death in multiple ways. Knowing that I had an ancestor who was incarcerated for his faith is something that I think it's going to take time for me to truly process. Religious tolerance is incredibly important to me. And also that passion that William Brewster clearly had to even become a prisoner and possibly a martyr is something I really respect. Each of these snippets of the story are absolutely life-changing. I think that it would be fitting to go to Cambridge University, where my 10 times great-grandfather was a student and was probably exposed initially to the ideas that radicalized his faith. Naturally, I'd like to find out what the ultimate motivation was for William Brewster's trip on the Mayflower, so I'm meeting with Professor Anthony Milton. Well, I understand that you may have some answers to a series of questions I have about William Brewster, whom I know escaped to Holland. So, what do you know about his time in Holland?
This is a collection of letters from the English ambassador to the Netherlands, Sir Dudley Carleton. He's reporting back to the Secretary of State of King James, and he's reporting on events in the Netherlands in 1619.
And withal, I sent your honor a book called Perth Assembly, of which finding many copies dispersed at Leiden, I had reason to suspect it was printed in that town. Yet in search after that book, I have discovered the printer of another, and that is one William Brewster, a Brownist, who has had of Perth Assembly sent over into England and Scotland. Okay, so what this is saying is that he may not have been the author and the printer of the Perth Assembly, but he's been distributing it. And he's been managing to send copies to Scotland and England.
That's right. Take a look at a final letter from Carleton describing an attempt to seize Brewster.
In my last, I advertised your honor that Brewster was taken at Leiden, which proved an error, and that the constable, who was employed by the magistrates for his apprehension, being a dull, drunken fellow, took one man for another.
That's right. So this is a little bit later. They seem to think for a second they'd caught Brewster, but they hadn't. They'd caught his colleague, Thomas Brewer. But that is where the trail goes cold. What we do know is that while he's in London, he is able to arrange transportation, royally approved by King James. So the next time we hear of Brewster, he's heading off from Plymouth to New England, presumably a very relieved man.
It's a lot to take on board. You know, part of what I was reflecting on, the American idea inheres in his story. Everything is implicated. All of our basic freedoms that we, value and in many instances take for granted in America inhere. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, separation of church and state.
That's right.
Thank you so much for your time. When I initially found out that I was descendant from folks who came over on the Mayflower, I thought, I'm so American, I'm English. But I'm actually so English, I'm American. I think that it would be fitting to go to William Brewster's final departure point from England, Plymouth, and there I'll meet my dad and do a major brain dump about everything I've learned.